everyone. This is Gary Berman, host of the Cyber Hero Adventure Show. It is so good to see all of you and to have a very, very special opportunity to listen and learn from one of the smartest people in not just the cybersecurity community, but anywhere. Malcolm Harkins, the CISO of Epiphany Systems. Hey, Malcolm, welcome to the show.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really, really great to see you. In fact, it's kind of great to see anybody. And when you and I started talking about the topic of the show, leadership in turbulent times, I had no idea what I was really talking about.
Yeah, well, and speaking of leadership in turbulent times, how are you doing?
Oh, thanks so much. I really am blessed. I'm so grateful for all the well wishers in the cybersecurity community and beyond. You may know that I had a bit of a scare with pulmonary embolism. So wear compression socks when you fly. Try to get out of your seat and walk a little bit and look all this stuff online so you can avoid what happened to me. But I'm on the mend.
Great to hear. Great to hear.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So, why don't you tell a little bit about your origin story to our audience for those people that may not know anything about you?
Yeah, just a little bit of a background. So I've been at Epiphany Systems since we launched a year and a couple months ago. Prior to that, did a stint at a web application security company. Prior to that, was Chief Security and Trust Officer for Silence. And then prior to that, my life was simple. Straight out of graduate school, I went to work for Intel and spent a good 10, 11 years in various business roles, finance, procurement, business operations. And then a little over 21 years ago, give or take a little bit, I started running security and business continuity in the IT team, and then eventually became worldwide Chief Security and Privacy Officer, overseeing typical InfoSec stuff, but also corporate emergency management and the security development lifecycle and privacy by designs for Intel's products and services.
Wow. So when do you sleep?
It's funny. I don't luckily require too much sleep. I live in California. I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning, California time, at the gym at 4:30 every day. I'm one of those, in order to create energy, you got to expend energy. And what keeps me moving is just keep hustling.
It's interesting, the extraordinary discipline that you're talking about now. How would you say that discipline applies in leadership, during turbulent times, regardless of the source of the turbulence?
Yeah, well, regardless of the source of turbulence, you have to have a consistency of purpose. You have to have a consistency of action. I'm not a sailor, but I have taken sailing lessons, right? And I do boat pretty routinely. Waves come up, winds come up, and so you end up in choppy waters, like we do in any situation. And, if you're sailing, you're tacking, right? You're ebbing and flowing. But you have a heading, you have a direction, you have that continuity of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it tactically. You're dodging and you're weaving and doing this and that, but everybody knows the heading. And to me, the most important thing is having that heading in turbulent times, and then curating commitment from everybody on the team so that they will they'll struggle through the challenges to kind of keep you on course.
That's an incredibly appropriate metaphor that I had not, heard before. And one of the things, if you just use that metaphor, is it can be very scary, and so there's this widely known and understood term in the cybersecurity community: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We're actually working on our own character, regarding FUD. How would you advise our audience to lead, your teams and also your customers and sort of navigate this FUD?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple aspects of the generation of FUD, and then there's reasons why it's sticky at times. The security industry itself, by and large, has grown up selling on fear. So the industry promotes FUD because it in some cases moves product. Security teams sometimes internally influence with FUD to try and get people to move the needle and listen. For me, I've done that occasionally, but on the vendor side or even on the internal side, if you're using FUD to move the needle on a control or get budget, I would say it's the equivalent of eating fast food. It might give you short-term sustenance, but it's long-term not good for your health. So don't do it. Recognizing tactically you might have to. So that's part of the things that generates it. Now, when you talk about the economic uncertainty we've been facing, the pandemic created fear and uncertainty and doubt. The antidote for FUD is having the right communication, the right consistency of purpose, the curation of commitment, which I talked about in our kind of teaser video. Having a culture and a leadership style that causes your employees to believe in the mission, believe in the management, believe in themselves, believe in their peers, feel like they belong. If I feel like I belong, I'm not going to be fearful. Why? Because the environment is showing it gives a crap about me. And again, feeling like you matter. If the work that you do and the work the organization does matters, you won't have doubt about what you're doing or why you're doing it. You won't have uncertainty about the priority of that work. And you're not going to be fearful because, again, you have that collective, I believe, I belong, I matter. That is like I said, an antidote, a control mechanism, a change in the paradigm that, if done right, doesn't mean that FUD won't creep in here and there, but organizationally, it's going to have the antibodies that cure it.
You mentioned very quickly, maybe you can amplify, I believe, I matter, I belong. Did I get that right?
I believe, I belong, I matter.
Does it matter which order you?
It likely doesn't, though. I start with I believe, mainly because for me as an individual, diagnosing my own idiosyncrasies, my own behavioral problems, and where I lose being in my ideal state, it starts with I lose hope. I lose faith. Hence, I believe. Once I believe, I want to feel a part of it. Hence, I belong. Those two things are there. Finding work that matters, shouldn't be that hard. Sometimes it is. But if you have the other two, you can more easily go through the ebbs and flows of maybe doing work that doesn't matter so much to you or doesn't have the impact, because those other two anchor points are strong enough. But if you're doing work that matters and you're not in a culture that you feel like you belong, you're going to be disillusioned and leave, right? And that will then eventually affect your faith in the organization. So they're all interconnected, like in a Venn diagram. They all push and pull on each other.
I mean, it's an incredibly useful framework, to think about one's existence, whether it be within a corporation or whatever challenges, one has. It's incredibly useful. How did you come up with that?
I wouldn't say that it was anything other than, periods of time just doing my own wandering and self-reflection. In fact, on the mantle over there, I actually have the trademark for those 6 words: I believe, I belong, I matter. And I had attempted for a while to go get the trademark office to give it to me, because I wrote it into one of my books. I was using it in talks, and they kept going, hey, there's kind of prior art, and we want more proof. And then I was like, I had this epiphany that I went to the shelf, and I had, on my wife and I, our 20th wedding anniversary, I created a picture book. And the title of it was I Believe, I Belong, I Matter. And, stories and all that type of stuff. And the last page of the book is, I believe in you, I belong with you, I matter because of you. So this stuff also applies outside of work and relationships, families, friends, your kids. And so I Xeroxed it and I sent it in to the attorney, and they sent it into the trademark office. A few weeks later, they turned around the trademark service mark for it. So for me, it's just been an evolution of thought. And then as I was just distilling those aspects, it turned into that framework that eventually, when and if I have the time, I'll take some of those talks and some of the stories that I use and turned it into hopefully a leadership book.
Well, you're already well on your way to be sure. And for our audience, if you have some questions or comments or thoughts about anything we're talking about, you can use the comments tab or other indicators, on LinkedIn. I'm sure Malcolm would love to hear what you have to say, because just prior to hitting the record button, Malcolm said, to paraphrase, that I love spontaneous things. I'm much better being off script. So you can throw him any type of questions or comments that you have, and we'll air them, and Malcolm will be able to comment on them. So returning just for a moment to fear and uncertainty and doubt, if you just think about the way people process information, in our deep brain, our reptilian brain, we have this fight or flight kind of mechanism that has served people well because we're here. How do you control, or what's your view on fight or flight?
Well, anybody who knows me knows I'm a fighter. I'll pick a fight. I'll jump into a fight. If there's somebody who needs help, I will leverage it. I'm a noisy individual. So when I fight, I typically fight sideways organizationally or up. I generally don't fight down. That's also a leadership characteristic. No employee wants their leader, yeah, you can bark, you can, do some stuff, but when I fight sideways and I fight up, to break the calcification of paradigm that's getting in my way, or reducing the efficacy of the actions that my organization is trying to take. Right. And that's a challenge that security teams have, because there's a lot of budgets, bureaucracy, and behavior issues that are within corporate America that we are battling against. But it's a battle just like we battle threat actors and threat agents.
I mean, that's incredibly interesting. And so moving on to, our next topic about the whole idea of remote work or working, anywhere. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I've been doing it for a long time. I've had remote teams, and I was remote from many of the people that worked for me or that I worked for 20 plus years ago at Intel. It was a worldwide organization. So there's some aspect of remote work that a lot of people got woken up to because of the pandemic. And I go, well, shame on them. The technology was there. They could have enabled aspects of that. I think there's a downside to it at times, though, because you might lose organizational cohesion, right? Not being around other people sometimes reduces that feeling of belonging. Other cases, it enhances it because, not being distracted by things in the typical work environment can actually make some people more productive. So I think we need to appropriately embrace it. And some people are good with it. Some organizations are good with it, but in some cases, it's not ideal for an individual. I know some friends that prefer to be in a physical environment because it gives them energy. It kind of feeds their soul, so to speak. And I think if you're that type of an individual, you should seek work where you can work routinely or all the time or in a physical environment around others.
And so one of the challenges that everyone has is how to balance that out. What is your impression about, who works in an office and who doesn't, and all the variables, around that?
I'm not. I like having directional, focus on that, right? But I think it needs to be dialed into the individual, the context of the work, and the context of the situations that people are under. If I'm a manufacturing employee, I'm going to have to be on site. Why? Because that's where manufacturing happens, right? If I'm an infosec person, well, depending upon my role, I could be relatively remote a good chunk of the time. But if I'm in the security operations team, or perhaps in the digital forensics team, there's a cohesion that you want with those employees routinely, in which case having them be co-located pretty routinely makes a lot of sense. Or in an incident, war room, everybody gets in the war room physically and or logically, depending upon the situation that's going on. So I think you can be, work needs to happen where work needs to happen, but recognizing the context, the individual, and those situational things really might drive the need for on-site or off-site. If an event's going on at 2 a.m, getting everybody to leave their homes and drive on site, one, will delay the response action, and two, make it harder. So, like I said, I think you really just have to look at all of those things and make it be agile enough to hopefully optimize for the organization and the individual.
I mean, like, what is fair, is what someone might have in their brain. So if they see their colleague who does not have to commute, and you do, I mean, how, from a leadership perspective, how do you handle that?
It's a good question. Everybody always looks at fair relative to themselves, and the way in which we've got to get them to think about fair is not as black and white, because if we make it everything rule based, then in reality, you're probably going to create unfair situations for various individuals. I've had people who, a couple individuals back in my Intel day, one, for family reasons and aging parents and stuff, needed to move back to the Midwest. Well, at the time, Intel had a policy of work at work, but I needed them. We gave them time. So it's like, hey, you've got a year. Why? Because I wanted to be flexible to their needs. I need to be flexible to what I needed. And guess what? Within that year, they moved back, and I didn't lose a great employee. Had another employee that when a location was shut down because the company didn't need the location anymore, they were on the InfoSec team. They were a brilliant person. I let them be remote. We tried to relocate them at one point, and it didn't work. Why? Because they had a special needs child that disrupted the care of that child. And I'm like, we're not going to do that. You can go back, to Colorado, and we will allow you to be remote. And I had to fight that battle internally and re-justify it. But that's where I go, you have to, the fairness is, what's the right answer for the business? What's the right answer for the individual? And if you're really focused on both of those appropriately, everybody in the end will feel like it's fair. And if you're doing that and you're doing it transparently, then it goes back to the I believe, I belong, I matter. My management will fight for me. They're giving me work that matters, and they're making me feel like I belong, because they're not going to just blanketly apply a policy that may not be appropriate to the situation.
That's perfect for our next segment here. We're talking all about talent and how to attract and also retain during turbulent times talent. But just a programming note, there's a bit of a tech glitch between LinkedIn and our streaming service, so we're not able to receive any comments. And I'm actually kind of relieved that my right-hand person told me that, because this is incredibly important, and I know our industry is very interested, in these subjects. So hopefully we'll be covering, enough of these topics with enough depth that we'll be able to answer questions. And then also we'll be airing the show several times, and people will have an opportunity to submit some questions, and we'll forward them to you. So thanks for your understanding of that. So, diving, deeper into the notion of talent. I have heard some statistics recently that there are a number of layoffs in the tech industry. So that's one data set. But then also another data set is we continue to hear about the number of available job openings in the cybersecurity ecosystem. How do you reconcile those two things?
Well, yeah, I mean, depending upon how you look at the stats, right? There's a couple $1 million on a couple million unfilled positions in cybersecurity and stuff. I think there's a couple reasons for that. On the one hand, we have a shortage of skills and labor, partly because we've been doing such a crappy job running security, and we've been so reactive. We need more bodies to make up for the lousy controls we have in our corporate environment. Because if we had more effective and efficient controls, we'd need less people.
Oh.
Pure economics, right? So we've created the labor shortage to some extent because of the crappy products we have in our environment. The other side of it, though, is even if you did leading edge technology, had the best effective and efficient products across the board, you still probably might have a skill gap or a shortage gap. It's just, instead of a few million jobs across the United States, it might be 200,000. I'm making stuff up. But I think there's two ways to solve the talent gap. One, again, more efficient and effective approach to security will shrink the.
You fucking assholes. Okay, let's see. We're having a little bit of a tech issue. We temporarily lost Malcolm's signal. So when we work to get him back, what I'd like to do is just to encourage our audience to submit questions. You can send them to Gary at cyberheroescomics.com.
Hey, son of internet, talk about leadership in turbulent times.
Yeah, well, technology is great when it works. So I was just letting our audience know they can send questions to me. We'll forward them to you. So it was a perfect segue. Continue on with what you were saying.
Yeah, what we were talking about was on the talent side, right? Again, better, more efficient and effective approach to security will shrink the challenge on the labor, but we're still going to have a labor shortage. And I think the way in which we solve that labor shortage is we have to continually grow the talent. We have to grow it by reaching in, as young as possible. We have to go into areas that might not seem obvious. I was a former finance guy, right? Running security for Intel, and then Silence. So you can look outside of the typical space for talent. You can go grab a manufacturing technician who's got an understanding of manufacturing and turn them into an InfoSec person. Guess what? Focused on the OT environment in manufacturing. I used to do that at Intel, right? So look at your organizations. We have a need for communication in InfoSec. Well, guess what? Most organizations have a marketing and communications team. They have an employee communications team. They're in marketing or in HR. Well, go hire them and have them help you with your InfoSec communications, right? We've also got to retrain and look across even the IT team and look at it. And I go, how do I have the app developer do better application security? Well, if they do better application security, then guess what? I need less application security folks, because I'm embedding the expectation of application security in their jobs, right? So I think if we look at it and go, the wide angle of the employee base in our organizations, and then where we recruit people from. And then the other issue is retention. If I've got a culture that the employees say, I believe, I belong, I matter, you're not going to have a retention issue. And guess what? Your ability to recruit goes up, because when you post a job, everybody wants to work for you.
I mean, that's incredibly insightful. And it brings us to, our last topic today, which is, basically getting funds from the C-suite, within an organization, in sort of turbulent times, or in a downturn in the economy, which we seem to be, approaching or in right now. And you smiled too when you saw that. Like, tell me about that.
Well, for me, again, I'm a former finance guy and former procurement guy. I, like every organization, there's ups and downs in the economics of it. But if you can demonstrate that you're the most effective and efficient organization, guess what? Everybody else is going to be forced to shrink, and you're going to be held flat. And if you're held flat and everybody else shrinks, guess what? Your budget relatively grew. So always demonstrate that you handle more volume and you are more effective and efficient, and you're delivering better outcomes, and your budget will have less downward pressure. Because where there's not outcomes and you're not efficient, you're going to have more downward pressure. So rule number one. Rule number two, even in a downturn, there's choppiness. Projects slip, things happen, there's budget left over in some organizations. Figure out how to take somebody else's budget. Because if at the broader IT level, a project's running behind and they can't get people, or they're uncertain about what they're going to do from a corporate level, that then pauses the implementation of a new system because a business venture is getting slowed. Guess what? Go grab some of that money, use it on yours. So again, there's all those aspects of it. But again, for me, it's also how are you showing annually a real business return? And if you could go to your CFO and say, I can lower your risk, lower the total cost of controls, and improve the business velocity, give me $1 million. I will shrink the risk from this to this. I will lower long-term total cost of controls by $1.5 million over the next 12 months. And I'm going to speed up business processes here, here, and here. What CFO won't fund that even during a downturn?
Wow. I mean, that is incredibly, useful and specific advice that I'm sure our audience is going to be benefiting from. And it's also kind of a perfect segue just to say a quick thank you to the amazing people who have been on our show and who are helping us. We couldn't do it without you, so we really appreciate that. And so as we're wrapping up, Malcolm, what final bit of advice do you want to share?
It kind of ties back to all of this and mitigating, the challenges that we've got. And, a lot of people talk about loyalty. Loyalty is a consequence of leadership, and it's a leadership issue at the end of the day, in managing fear, in managing talent, in managing the budgets, in curating that commitment with your organizations, and in being able to attract and retain talent. So think of it as a leadership issue. Take the challenge and recognize you'll have that loyalty if you manage and lead right.
Fantastic. And how does our audience get more information about you or contact you or your company?
Yeah, Malcolm at epiphanysys.com. You can go to epiphanysystems.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter at Protect2Enable.
Well, on behalf of a grateful digital universe and a very grateful Gary Berman, what a privilege to listen and learn from you. Malcolm, thanks for who you are and what you do, and most importantly, why you do it. And to our audience, wear compression socks, walk in the aisles, and thanks for who you are and what you do and why you do it as well.
Thanks, Gary.